I was just a passerby who happened to cross her path. Yet by accident I saved Willow Liu, the daughter of the Liu family, who nearly took her own life after a devastating breakup. I fell in love with her at first sight, stayed by her side as she slowly healed from her heartbreak, and eventually walked with her into the hall of marriage. However, a sudden car accident caused her to lose 5 years of her memory, bringing her back to the year when she was deeply in love with her first love, Makoto. What I never could have imagined, even in my dreams, was that my parents-in-law, who had always looked down on me, would seize this opportunity to arrange for Makoto to return to the country, hoping he and my wife would rekindle their old romance. And what I never could have imagined even more was that Willow, who once loved her first love so deeply that she nearly gave up her life for him, simply and calmly threw out a single question, leaving everyone frozen in place. Chapter 1. The sharp scent of disinfectant in the hospital room, along with the steady beep, beep, of the cardiac monitor, had been my entire world for the past 3 days, until Willow's eyelashes trembled, just once. Only then did my world begin to beat again. For the past 72 hours, I had stayed here, feeling as though I were trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. But when she finally opened her eyes on the hospital bed, all I could see in those beautiful eyes was unfamiliarity and wariness directed at me. The love we once shared was gone without a trace. Who are you? Her very first words were a question, doubt and challenge wrapped together. She had woken up, but she had forgotten me. The doctor's words buzzed in my ears, each one like a dull blade, sawing back and forth against my nerves. Hippocampal damage, retrograde amnesia. How much memory is lost varies from person to person. Her varies from person to person meant 5 years. 5 years, including everything from when we first met, to falling in love, to getting married. She had forgotten it all. I didn't break down. I didn't even show much grief, because I knew that any intense emotion right now would only frighten her. I pulled out a chair and sat down a few steps away from her bed. A safe distance, a distance that wouldn't make her feel threatened. A lot has happened in the past 5 years. We met 3 years ago, and last December, we got married. I did my best to rein in my emotions, recounting everything that had happened during those 5 years in the calmest tone I could manage. Because of a car accident, you lost your memories from the past 5 years. To make her believe me, I took out my phone. My fingers slid across the cold screen and unlocked it. My movements were steady, so steady it scared even me. The first photo in my gallery was a picture of us on top of a snow-covered mountain in Switzerland. I had wrapped her in my coat. Her nose was red from the cold, yet her smile was brighter than the snowy peaks behind her. I handed her the phone. She looked at it hesitantly. In her eyes there was confusion. There was caution, but not even the faintest hint of familiarity. Photo after photo slid by. In the lavender fields of Provence, she tucked a small bundle of purple flowers into my collar. On the stone-paved streets of the capital, she wore a kimono and stood on tiptoe to steal a kiss on my cheek. In our kitchen, she wore my white shirt with a completely mismatched pink apron tied around her waist, flour smudged on her face, waving a spatula at me like a little menace. The her in those photos, her smiling eyes and gentle brows, was the image carved into my heart. But that happiness, so full it nearly overflowed, was something the present her couldn't understand at all. I watched her, trying to find even the smallest crack, the slightest softening, in her icy expression, but there was nothing. Her brows knitted slightly, as if she were looking through a stranger's photo album, one that had nothing to do with her. That's not me. I could read those words clearly in her gaze. At least, not the version of herself that existed in her memory. I forced myself to meet her clear yet distant eyes and said, "You don't have to believe me right away. You can investigate on your own. Ask all your friends. But before that, I have a suggestion." I swallowed the bitterness surging up my throat and said each word clearly. "Let's not tell the outside world about your memory loss for now. That way, we can avoid anyone with ulterior motives taking advantage of you. And when you interact with others, you can judge from their reactions whether what I'm saying is true." She nodded slightly. The distance in her eyes finally loosened just a little. And then she handed the phone back to me. "The car accident, how did it happen?" She finally asked the most crucial question. That question was like a key, unlocking the gate behind my carefully maintained calm. My Adam's apple bobbed uncontrollably. The heavy stone in my chest, which had only just fallen back into place when she woke up, was hoisted up again, weighing down my heart. I could feel my nails digging deep into my palms. It was to save me. The images from that moment, the screech of tires against the road, the force of her hands pushing against my chest, the instant her eyes lost their light as she fell, exploded in my mind all over again. An out-of-control car came speeding toward us. You pushed me out of the way. The moment my words fell, bang. A deafening crash. The hospital room door flew open as if rammed by a wild beast, slamming violently into the wall, and the instant I saw who it was, my blood nearly froze. It was Makoto, Willow's first love, the man who had plunged her into 2 full years of heartbreak. And now, with her memories rolled back 5 years, Willow had returned precisely to the age of 20, to the time when she loved Makoto the most. The moment I realized this, every muscle in my body tensed involuntarily. Makoto wore a perfectly tailored beige trench coat. His hair was slightly damp, as if he had rushed over through a sudden downpour. His face carrying just the right mix of urgency and weariness. He always knew how to present his best self, carefully wrapped in the most heart-stirring circumstances. I didn't even need to turn around. I could clearly feel the body behind me, tense with vigilance just moments ago, quietly relax. Those eyes that held only unfamiliarity and scrutiny for me lit up the instant they landed on Makoto. In that light, there was surprise, there was joy, and there was also a trace of something else. Something I knew all too well. Something that pierced straight through me, infatuation. In that moment, I became painfully aware of a cruel truth. To the present Willow, I, George, was a stranger who needed to be verified again and again. But Makoto was someone who belonged to her soul. Someone who needed no proof at all. Chapter 2. The moment Makoto stepped into the room, he lunged toward the bedside in a single stride. His voice trembled. His eyes rimmed red. Thank God, Willow, you're finally awake. I'm sorry. This is all my fault. If I hadn't gone abroad back then, if you had been by my side, none of this would have happened. As he spoke, he reached out, trying to take Willow's right hand where it rested outside the blanket. I was so angry I almost laughed. My wife had lost her memory. It didn't mean you could take advantage of the situation and barge in however you pleased. Before his fingertips could touch Willow, I reached out, grabbed his arm, and yanked him backward, making him stumble and forcing him away from the bed. Ignoring my parents-in-law, who had followed Makoto into the room with their usual looks of scrutiny and dissatisfaction directed at me, I fixed him with an icy stare. Mr. Ito, mind yourself. Willow is my wife. Forced away like that, Makoto Ito spun toward me, his eyes blazing with so-called righteous fury. George, how can you be so selfish? How long were you planning to keep this hidden? Willow has lost her memory, and you actually dared not tell Uncle and Auntie. You want to take advantage of the fact that she doesn't remember anything and keep deceiving her. As Makoto hurled accusations at me, my mother-in-law had already grabbed Willow's hand, tears spilling down her face. My foolish daughter, you've suffered so much. Just look at the life you've lived these past few years. We told you back then, George. Never mind. Now that Makoto is back, everything will be fine. My father-in-law chimed in from the side, his voice sharp. This is what you call taking good care of my daughter. You really planned things well. Married for barely half a year, and you couldn't wait to make your move. What an ungrateful wolf with a human face. After hearing them speak like that, I could clearly feel the look in Willow's eyes shifting from caution to fear, and then to disgust. That gaze chilled me to the bone, but I couldn't retreat. Behind me was the woman I loved. Even if she no longer recognized me, I still had a responsibility to make sure she wasn't misled. I slowly released my grip on Makoto's arm and turned to my father-in-law, dropping the honorific for the first time. Mr. Liu, the car accident was my failure. I didn't protect her, I admitted calmly, because it was the truth. Then I changed tack, looking straight at Makoto. But that incompetence shouldn't become a stage for someone else's performance. My gaze swept from Makoto to my parents-in-law. My voice wasn't loud, but every word was clear. The driver who caused the accident is at the police station. The statements are all on record, and the reason that car lost control is written out in detail. If you don't believe it, with your influence, it wouldn't be hard to verify it yourselves. Dad, Mom, Willow needs to rest. I looked at the two elderly people with darkened faces. If there's anything to discuss, we can do it outside. Don't scare her here with your conjectures and theatrics. I don't know who's putting on a show. Makoto sneered coldly, shaking off the restraint and preparing to continue. You, Makoto. A cool, slightly weak voice, soft, yet instantly cutting through all the noise in the room. It was Willow. In the eyes she turned toward Makoto, the affection was still there, but now there was also a probing, composed sharpness. You went abroad later. Such a simple question, yet it was like a fishbone lodged in Makoto's throat, instantly rendering his display of deep emotion ridiculous. The expression on his face froze. After a long moment, he hurriedly tried to explain. Willow, there was a reason for that. Listen to me. Willow ignored his explanation, her gaze growing even sharper. When did you come back? Makoto's eyes began to dart away, his voice turning vague. Just recently. As soon as I heard something had happened to you, I rushed over. So that means, up until I got married, you were abroad all these years, right? Willow lowered her eyes, making it impossible to read the emotion on her face. Unconsciously, she began to gently rub the base of her left ring finger with the thumb of her right hand. That spot, up until the car accident, had held the wedding ring I designed for her. The motion lasted only a moment before she abruptly stopped, as if burned, a flicker of surprise flashing through her eyes. And I, who had been calmly observing from the side ever since she began speaking, felt a ripple stir in my chest. Rubbing her ring finger while thinking was a habit Willow had only developed after marrying me. Makoto's face fell at once. In his anxiety, he tried to move closer to the hospital bed again, but there was no way I would allow that. I stepped directly between them, blocking him with unyielding firmness. So, Willow lifted her head again. This time, Her gaze deliberately avoided Makoto, completely disregarding his pale excuses. She looked straight at her parents. My marriage to this Mr. Wang is real, right? A trace of undisguised awkwardness flashed across her father's face. He cleared his throat a few times before forcing out, "That's technically true, but since you've already..." Willow cut him off without hesitation. "Oh, I'm tired. I want to rest for a while." Her gaze swept across everyone in the room, including me. "Could I ask all of you to leave?" Chapter 3. The door of the hospital room closed softly behind me, sealing off the world I shared with Willow. Left in the corridor were only Makoto and the Lu parents, their faces dark with displeasure. The air seemed to freeze under the harsh white lights. Each of our shadows stretched long and distorted across the floor. "George, let's talk." Makoto spoke first. The feigned urgency had drained from his handsome face, replaced by a cold, condescending arrogance. I ignored him and turned instead to my parents-in-law. Even though the looks in their eyes chilled me, I still maintained the most basic courtesy. "Dad, Mom, Willow needs quiet rest. I understand your concerns, but emotions won't solve anything right now." My mother-in-law snorted and turned her head away, clearly unwilling to say another word to me. My father-in-law kept a grim expression, his scrutinizing gaze sweeping over me. "George, you'd better pray that Willow comes out of this safely. Otherwise, right now, the one Willow loves is me." Makoto cut in, his voice carrying the smug satisfaction of someone proclaiming victory. He stepped in front of me and deliberately adjusted the collar of his expensive trench coat. His eyes filled with contempt. "You're nothing but the owner of a small company, average education, relying on a few petty tricks to take advantage of the situation. And I am the heir of the Ito family. What I can give Willow is a height you couldn't reach even if you struggled your entire life. Tell me, what do you have to compete with me? Willow and I are the true match. George, you're just the other man, a laughable substitute. Now that the real one is back, it's time for you to get lost." I looked at his face, overflowing with arrogance and superiority, and suddenly found it a little amusing. "Mr. Ito, your confidence is as blindly misplaced as ever." My voice wasn't loud, but it froze the smile on his face. "All those colorful photos of you fooling around abroad, drifting from party to party, do you need me to print them out so Willow can enjoy them properly? And as for that overseas degree you're so proud of, how is it that I've heard you were once publicly reported under your real name for academic fraud?" Even though the matter was eventually suppressed, rumors don't arise without reason, do they? My tone remained calm, yet it was like a precise scalpel, slicing open his polished exterior. "There's something else I'm even more curious about." I took a step closer, forcing him back, locking eyes with his now avoiding gaze. "Ever since Willow decided to be with me, I've heard your position in the Ito family has become a little delicate, especially after your capable younger brother was transferred from a branch company back to headquarters. It seems Uncle Ito has started relying on him more. So what's going on here? Could it be that the greatest value of you, this so-called heir, is nothing more than marrying into the Lu family?" Each word I spoke was like a needle, piercing straight into the most fragile part of his pride. Makoto's face turned from white to red, from red to a sickly green. His whole body trembled with rage as he pointed at me, sputtering you, for a long time, unable to refute a single word. In the end, he could only throw out a hollow threat, "Just you wait," before turning and leaving in a sorry rush. Under my parents-in-law's complicated gazes, I didn't look at him again and turned to head back toward the hospital room. But my mother-in-law stepped in front of me, her face full of undisguised disgust. "What are you trying to do now? Haven't you made my daughter miserable enough?" My father-in-law's expression was equally grim. "George, we have things to say to Willow alone. You should go back." As his words fell, the door to the hospital room opened a crack from the inside. It was Willow. She leaned against the doorframe, her face still pale, but her eyes strikingly clear. "Mr. Wang," she said to me, "your company is just starting out. You must have many things to take care of. You should go ahead and get back to work. My parents are here with me." There was no emotion in her voice, only a distance that left no room for refusal. I looked at her, my throat tightening. I had 1,000 words to say, but not one would come out. In the end, I simply nodded. "All right, get some good rest." I turned and walked away, my steps heavy. When I stepped out of the hospital building, the cold night wind hit my face, yet I felt no chill at all. I took out my phone and dialed a number. "Keep a close eye on someone for me, Makoto Ito from the Ito family. He's just returned to the country. I want every detail of his movements, no matter how small." After hanging up, I looked up at the brightly lit window of Willow's hospital room and stood there for a long time. Chapter 4. When I returned to the hospital room the next day carrying a thermal container, Makoto was already there. The room was filled with an overly sweet scent of roses. Makoto was holding a large bouquet of vivid red roses, eagerly trying to hand them to Willow. On the bedside table sat several high-end food boxes, clearly expensive at a glance, each stamped with the logo of a private luxury kitchen. Expressionless, I walked over and casually pushed the offending food boxes onto the floor. Bang! A dull sound echoed through the room. Then I placed the thermal container steadily in the spot most convenient for Willow. The noise in the room died instantly. Makoto's smile froze, and my parents-in-law's expressions darkened. I ignored them, bent down, and spoke gently to Willow. I made some fish soup. Have a little while, it's hot. Willow's gaze finally shifted away from the glaring roses and landed on my face. Her pale lips moved slightly. She didn't look at Makoto at all. The flowers are too glaring, she said softly. Take them away. Makoto's face immediately turned awkward. My mother-in-law hurried to smooth things over. Willow, Makoto prepared these especially for you. Aren't they beautiful? I said. Take them away. Willow's voice was still soft, but there was an unmistakable firmness in it. I looked at Makoto coldly and said flatly, Mr. Ito, do you not understand plain language? Willow told you to take the flowers away, or would you prefer to continue yesterday's unfinished conversation with me? Makoto Ito's face cycled through shades of green and white. In the end, under a pointed look from my father-in-law, he could only awkwardly clutch the bouquet and retreat out of the room. The air in the hospital room finally felt clean again. Only then did Willow lift her head and look at Makoto, who had stopped outside the door, at a loss. She watched him quietly for a long time, so long that fine beads of sweat began to form on Makoto's forehead. Makoto, she finally spoke, her voice calm like still water. When I look at you, I do feel happy. I used to be deeply attached to that feeling. Makoto's eyes lit up, as if he had seized a lifeline, and he hurried to speak, but Willow shifted gears without giving him any chance to interrupt. But do you know, when I woke up and saw you again this time, I felt a constant sense of distance. That feeling didn't make sense until I learned that you went abroad. Willow, it's not like that. Listen to me. Makoto panicked. You can't stop me from going overseas just because you love me. You can't stop me from becoming a better person. That wouldn't be fair to me. He rolled out that familiar, well-practiced line. Willow suddenly laughed. There was a trace of icy mockery in that smile. I stopped you from becoming a better person. She lifted her eyes, and the gaze in those beautiful eyes turned sharp as a blade. In your mind, becoming better means studying abroad on a degree bought with family money while partying with blonde bombshells night after night. You always said that if I loved you, I should support everything you did. But while I was supporting you, you never seemed to think that staying loyal to me was something you owed. So what you're saying is, because I loved you, I deserve to pay for all your moods and indulgences. Makoto was instantly struck dumb. His face drained from red to white, then to a sickly green, cold sweat pouring down. Willow, that was all in the past. So are we. Willow cut off his feeble excuses calmly. Makoto completely broke down. He took a step forward, his voice cracking. Willow, give me one more chance, please. Just one. I stepped forward as well, silently placing myself between him and the hospital bed, fixing him with an icy stare. Makoto's sobbing plea came to an abrupt halt because of my movement. Willow shifted her gaze away from his face and looked out the window at the bare, leafless tree outside. Her eyes were hollow. Makoto, some mistakes don't come with second chances. I could tolerate your youthful recklessness, tolerate your impatience, because I believed people could grow, but you should never have crossed the bottom line. Once principles are broken even once, there will be countless times after that. And I have neither the interest nor the energy to forgive you endlessly. I can choose not to love, not to marry, but I will never accept a betrayer. You know that. I hate compromising myself. She withdrew her gaze and looked at him one last time. The remnants of affection in her eyes were completely covered by a resolute, icy finality. I admit it, I still love you, but from the moment I learned that you betrayed me, I no longer wanted to keep loving you. Makoto staggered back 2 steps, utterly lost. His lips moved, but not a single word came out. My parents-in-law looked just as terrible. They clearly wanted to say something, yet under Willow's clear, unwavering gaze, they too fell silent. The room sank into deathly stillness. In the end, Makoto left the hospital room like a puppet drained of all spirit, dragging his heavy steps in miserable defeat. Silence filled the room. I looked at Willow. She remained in that same posture, her back straight, like a cold plum blossom standing firm against wind and snow. And then, my pupils suddenly contracted. A drop of bright red liquid slipped through the gaps between the fingers of her left hand and fell onto the snow-white bedsheet. So glaring, my heart felt as if it were seized violently by an invisible hand. Even my breathing stopped for a moment. I strode forward, ignoring her shock and weak resistance. I forcibly took hold of her tightly clenched left hand. Her palm was icy cold, damp. I couldn't tell whether it was cold sweat or blood. One finger at a time, using the gentlest force I could manage, I pried open her curled fingers. A white shard of porcelain, its edges sharp, was embedded deep in her palm. Blood soaked everything. I looked at the vicious wound in her hand, then raised my eyes to meet her stubborn gaze, shimmering with moisture. The pain in my chest was so intense I could barely breathe. It had taken her 2 full years to barely crawl out of the shadow left by breaking up with Makoto. And now, by a cruel twist of fate, she was being forced, at the moment she loved him most, to face his betrayal all over again. The depth of that pain was far beyond anything I had imagined. She had severed her past with her own hands, and in the cruelest way possible, punished the part of herself that still loved. She tried to pull her hand back, but her strength was pitifully weak. "Let go," she said hoarsely. I ignored her. With my other hand, I hit the call button by the bed without hesitation. Only then did I slowly lift my head and look coldly at my stunned parents-in-law. "Is this what you wanted?" Forcing her to see someone she didn't want to see, hear things she didn't want to hear, making her tear open her own wounds again just after she woke up. "Are you satisfied now?" Their faces shifted between pale and livid, and for a long time, they couldn't say a word. The nurse pushed the door open quickly when she saw the injury on Willow's hand. She was startled as well. "Mr. Wong, we'll take it from here." I nodded and stepped aside, making room for the nurse to clean and dress the wound. Chapter 5. From that day on, Makoto never appeared again. My parents-in-law's visits also became rare. Each time they came, they carried complicated expressions, as if there were many things they wanted to say. Yet in the end, all that remained were a few perfunctory reminders. In the hospital room, the cloying scent of roses had long since faded. In its place was the warm, homely aroma of the soups and stews I brought every day. A full month passed like this, quiet, uneventful. Willow recovered well. The wound in her palm had scabbed over, leaving behind only a faint pink scar. The day she was discharged, the weather was beautiful. I took care of all the procedures. She had changed out of her hospital gown and was wearing an ivory-colored long dress I had brought for her. Standing quietly by the window, watching the traffic flowing below, sunlight filtered through the glass, outlining her with a soft golden glow, making her look like a fragile painting. On the way home, neither of us spoke. She simply leaned against the car window, quietly watching the streets rush past, like a traveler newly arrived, trying to memorize the outline of the city. Our home was a high-rise apartment in the city center. It wasn't as grand or imposing as the Liu family's villa, but every piece of decor inside had been chosen and arranged by her and me together. I opened the door, and a familiar warmth rushed toward us. Sunlight poured in through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, scattering bright patches across the floor. Tiny dust motes floated in the air. By the entryway sat her favorite pair of fluffy slippers. On the living room wall hung photos from our travels together. On the balcony, the succulents she had been raising were thriving under my care, lush and green. On the counter, a vase of white irises still looked fresh. I had just changed them that morning before leaving. Everything here remained exactly as it had been when she left, filled with traces of a life once lived. She stood at the doorway, not stepping inside right away, simply looking. In those clear eyes, the vigilance and distance she'd shown in the hospital were gone, replaced by something else, a quiet, indescribable sense of ease, like a small boat that had drifted for a long time, finally finding a harbor where it could dock. She changed into the slippers and slowly walked into this completely unfamiliar home. She didn't speak. She merely let her fingertips brush over the soft back of the sofa, over the books we'd placed side by side on the shelves, over the cool surface of the dining table. At last, her gaze settled on me. She walked up to me slowly and raised her left hand. In the sunlight, I could clearly see the faint mark circling the base of her ring finger. Unconsciously, she used the thumb of her right hand to gently rub that empty spot. "Where's my ring?" Her voice was very soft, yet it was like a pebble dropped into the lake of my heart, still and silent for a month, sending ripples outward. I took a velvet box out of my pocket, opened it. The wedding ring I had designed for her myself lay quietly inside, the diamond's facets reflecting tiny shards of light. I handed the ring to her. She took it without hesitation and, naturally, slipped it back onto the ring finger of her left hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had never left. She raised her hand and looked at the ring she had regained, her eyes filled with a familiarity and attachment even she couldn't quite understand. After a long moment, she lowered her hand and looked up at me calmly. "George, I'm sorry." I paused slightly. The things I said to Makoto in the hospital. She lowered her eyes, her voice carrying a trace of weariness that was hard to detect. "I was actually saying them to you, too." My heart felt as if it were gently clenched by an invisible hand. "You know it, I still love him deeply. Even if reason tells me he isn't worth it, that instinctive inertia still causes me pain. So I had to use the harshest possible way to cut it off completely. Because to me, there is no second chance when it comes to love." Her gaze drifted toward the window, her eyes growing distant and sorrowful. Just like my parents, they came together for a family alliance, loving spouses in public, but behind closed doors, each living their own separate lives, betraying each other, tormenting each other. I grew up watching that. So the thing I despise most is compromising myself. She withdrew her gaze and looked back at me. For the first time, vulnerability and apology surfaced in her beautiful eyes. "I'm sorry. Someone who has just personally strangled her own love. Right now, all I feel is exhaustion and numbness. I even doubt whether I still have the ability to fall in love with someone else. So someone like me isn't worthy of being your wife. If you want a divorce, I'll accept it. The marital property can be divided with me as the party at fault. I won't object at all. Consider it compensation for your feelings." My throat felt blocked, and not a single word would come out. I could only look at her, watch her calmly say the most cruel things, laying herself open before me. She paused for a moment, as if giving me time to absorb it all. Then she continued, her tone carrying a trace of negotiation. But if, because you still love me, you don't want to separate, then at the very least, I must take responsibility for hurting your feelings. And for my responsibility as a wife, we can live together for 1 year. For that year, we'll live like a real married couple if I regain my memories. Or if I can fall in love with you again, then we'll keep going. If after 1 year I'm still like this, then we separate. 1 year is the limit, for you and for me. After that, bridge to bridge, road to road, we go our separate ways, each wishing the other well. She placed every choice into my hands. After hearing her words, I felt not the slightest trace of anger, only an overwhelming ache. My heart ached for my girl, the girl who had spent 2 full years clawing her way out of a failed relationship, who had finally learned how to love again, only to be forced by a cruel accident to walk the thorn-filled path of pain once more. In an even more brutal way, I stepped forward and gently took the hand on which she wore the ring. Her fingertips were cold. All right, 1 year, I answered without hesitation. I could feel her body relax, just a fraction. In response to my reply, looking into her eyes, I said each word slowly and clearly. But Willow, you need to remember this. This is not your fault, neither in the past, nor now. Have you done anything wrong? Even losing your memory happened because you were saving me. So don't talk about not being worthy, and don't apologize. The one who should apologize is me, because I failed to protect you. I pressed her cold hand against my cheek, warming it little by little with my own body heat. You don't need to force yourself to do anything, and you don't need to feel any pressure. You just need to be yourself, just like before. That's enough. Chapter 6. My warm palm held her cold fingertips. She didn't pull away, only letting me lead her in quiet compliance. There was no affection in that compliance, only the calm of fulfilling a contract. Everything in this house was unfamiliar to her, including me. Night fell. When I came out after showering, she was already standing at the door of the master bedroom. She was wearing the silk nightgown I had prepared for her, but over it she'd put on a thick coat, like a layer of self-protective armor. She looked at me, as if waiting for me to make the first move. The air was thick with a wordless standoff. I understood what she was thinking. In her understanding, fulfilling a wife's duty probably also included sharing a bed. I said nothing. I walked straight into the room and took out a spare quilt and pillow from the wardrobe. Watching my actions, she finally spoke, a trace of confusion in her voice. What are you doing? I'm sleeping in the guest room. I held the pillow and walked past her. We're married, she reminded me. There was no willingness in her tone, only a stiff, almost doctrinal rigidity. I stopped and turned back to look at her. Willow, I agreed to spend a year with you, not to make you force yourself. You don't need to act like a proper wife in front of me. I just want you to be Willow. Good night. With that, I didn't linger. I walked into the guest room and gently closed the door. Our cohabitation began like this, in a strange, roommate-like mode. She had lost 5 years of work experience and knowledge. For the time being, there was no way for her to return to the Liu family's business. My parents-in-law seemed to tacitly accept this and didn't push her anymore. So she spent most of her time at home. She read books she had once studied, but now had no memory of, trying to pick up her professional field all over again. But more often, she simply sat there in a daze. Our floor-to-ceiling windows faced a great river that cut through the city, its waters flowing endlessly day and night. She would often hug her knees and sit on the carpet for an entire afternoon. She didn't speak. She showed no expression. Like an exquisite sculpture without a soul. I knew she was processing the pain tied to Makoto, the pain that had been forcibly dragged back into the light. She had severed the past in the most decisive way possible, but the wound still needed time to heal. I never disturbed her. Every morning before leaving, I changed the water for the white irises in the vase. When I came home, I cooked meals for 2. She didn't eat much, but she always finished quietly, then said, "Thank you," polite, distant, like 2 strangers who had just met. My company was at a critical stage of growth. A key project hit a bottleneck, and I was swamped, sleeping only 3 or 4 hours a night for days on end. That night, I dragged my exhausted body home after midnight. The living room lights were off. Only moonlight poured in through the huge windows, laying a layer of silver frost across the floor. I thought she had already gone to bed, but as I changed my shoes, I saw that familiar, slender silhouette. She was still sitting by the window, holding the same posture I had seen countless times, staring motionlessly at the river outside. My heart was pricked softly. I lightened my steps, walked over, took off my coat, and draped it over her shoulders. Her body trembled slightly, as if waking from a long dream. She turned her head in the moonlight. Her face was so pale it was almost translucent. "You're back." Her voice was hoarse, tinged with lingering confusion. "So soon?" I crouched down and met her eyes at eye level. "It's already 12:30. Willow." A flash of surprise crossed her pupils, followed by understanding. She had been sitting here again, for an entire afternoon and an entire evening. Time seemed to have lost all meaning for her. "Sorry." She lowered her head, her voice very soft. "I lost track of time." "It's okay." I adjusted the coat around her. "It's cold at night. Go back to your room and sleep." She nodded, stood up, and walked back to the master bedroom in silence. I watched her figure disappear behind the door, then slowly sat down in the spot she had just occupied. Outside the window, the river shimmered faintly under the moonlight, cold and silent, just like the chasm between her and me, one that seemed impossible to cross. Chapter 7. The next day, I made a decision. I came home early and moved a large stack of documents into the study. She looked surprised. "What's this?" "I'll be working from home from now on," I explained calmly. "Most of the company's business can be handled online anyway. There's not much difference." She was silent for a moment, then said softly, "It'll still be inconvenient in some ways. Those are small things." I smiled and reached out, intending to touch her cheek, then stopped halfway, forcing myself to pull my hand back with a hint of apology. But the very next second, she reached out with her own cool hand and held mine. Then, firmly, she pressed my palm against her cheek. Warmth and cold met in that instant. From then on, I spent most of my time at home, and she gradually got used to coming into the study to read. She said, "There's no window here." A week later, I was being driven half mad by a collaboration project. My brows knotted into a hard crease. The door to the study opened silently. It was Willow. She carried a cup of hot milk and walked in without making a sound. She gently placed the warm cup beside my hand, without the slightest noise. I rubbed my aching temples, sighed, picked up the milk, and gave her a grateful look. "Trouble." She sat across from me, her gaze falling on the documents spread across my desk. The Angel Tech Group project, still torn between option A and option B. My heart skipped. I hadn't expected her to speak up on her own. I tugged at my tie and nodded. "Yeah, Voyage Capital in Plan A is too greedy, but Plan B, the company behind it, has good terms. Yet something just feels off." She leaned against the desk, habitually rubbing her wedding ring, and said in an exceptionally calm tone, "What you're struggling with right now isn't actually choosing A or B." I looked up at her. A faint smile appeared as she continued, "You're just boxed in by the idea of cooperation. When both options have obvious flaws, maybe the problem isn't the options themselves, but why there are only two options to begin with." My eyebrows shot up at once. She raised two fingers and laid it out methodically. "The problem is actually very simple. There are only 2 points. First, funding. Company B promises to advance the capital, and that's precisely its biggest red flag. Angel Tech's project has a payout cycle of at least a year and a half. Company B is a rising startup. Where does it get the cash flow to front a project that could run into hundreds of millions? Where is that money coming from? Have you checked its affiliated investors and recent large capital movements? Is it possible that someone inside Angel Tech, some executive, is funneling benefits through Company B as a shell, trying to move the project from the left hand to the right?" A cold sweat instantly broke out across my back. Because I trusted Angel Tech's reputation, I had only looked at Company B on the surface, never digging deeper from this angle. Her tone remained calm. "Second, risk. What you need to consider isn't how much you'll earn if the cooperation goes smoothly, but what you'll lose in the worst-case scenario. With A, the worst outcome is low profit and exhaustion, but your company won't face a survival crisis. With B, if its capital chain is fabricated, or there's a hidden trap behind it, once something goes wrong mid-project, you'll be the one stuck. Your company could be dragged down by this single project." She looked at me and asked, word by word, "Can you afford that gamble right now?" After saying that, she went back to her seat and quietly resumed reading a book on finance. As for me, it was as if I'd been struck by lightning, my whole body frozen in place. In my mind, I was suddenly thrown back to an afternoon 2 years ago. Back then, I was wavering between starting my own business and finding a stable job at a company. The question is simple. First, are you willing to spend your whole life in that kind of job? Second, do you want to take a bold gamble in your life? I had answered, no, and I want to gamble. And then she smiled, bright as the entire summer sun, patted her chest and said, "Then what are you hesitating for? Go do it. If you fail, just smile for me, your sister will support you." I pulled myself out of the memory and looked again at the quiet girl reading in front of me. The memories were gone, but the intelligence carved into her soul, the decisiveness, the clarity that cut straight to the essence, those were still there. She was still her, my Willow. In that moment, the gloom that had weighed on my heart for days seemed to be effortlessly blown away by a few of her words. I looked at her, my throat tightening. The emptiness in my chest was filled once more with warmth. Chapter 8. Ever since the day in the study, when her words woke me from my daze, the air between us seemed to have quietly changed. That invisible barrier, untouchable yet solid as ice, felt as though it had been chipped open by her calm, incisive remarks, leaving behind a fine crack. At last, a sliver of sunlight could seep through. I continued working from home, and the study became the place where we spent most of our days. She no longer just sat silently in the corner clutching a book. Occasionally, she would lift her head, see me frowning at my computer screen, and suddenly toss out an observation, often striking straight at the heart of the matter. I realized that although she had lost the knowledge and experience accumulated over those 5 years, her innate business instinct and insight seemed etched deep into her soul. never truly gone, and I, too, gradually stopped avoiding her on purpose. When problems arose, I would actively seek her advice, spreading out complicated reports and plans in front of her. She would study them carefully, slender fingers tracing over the cold numbers, brows drawn together, eyes intent. That version of her slowly overlapped with the Willow in my memory, the decisive woman who moved through the business world without hesitation. Then, we began to talk about things beyond work. She would ask me about amusing incidents at my company, and I would tell her about which programmer had lost a few more hairs over a stubborn bug. She listened, and the corners of her lips would lift into a faint smile. So faint it was almost imperceptible, yet it was enough to make my heart race wildly. At some point, the polite thank you between us quietly disappeared. In its place were the cup of hot tea she would silently set beside me when I worked late into the night, and the sight of her coming over while I was busy in the kitchen, somewhat clumsily trying to help. Everything was moving in a good direction, slowly, but steadily, until that day, when the difficult project at my company finally found a perfect solution through her guidance, and I successfully signed the contract. When I got home, my mood was lighter than it had been in a long time. After dinner, she didn't go read as usual. Instead, she stood in front of the wall covered in our photos, quietly looking at them. Her gaze traveled from the snowy mountains of Switzerland, to the lavender fields of Provence, to the stone-paved streets of the capital. Finally, it settled on a photo in our kitchen, of her wearing my white shirt, flour on her face, brandishing a spatula at me. She stared at it for a very long time, so long that I thought she was simply lost in thought. "George," she suddenly spoke, her voice carrying a tone I had never heard before, a mix of uncertainty and solemn resolve. I walked over to her side. "I want to go out for a walk." My heart skipped a beat. She turned to look at me. In those clear eyes, always veiled by a thin mist, my reflection appeared clearly. "I want to see the places in these photos. I want to walk the paths we once walked together. Maybe." She paused, a hint of anticipation flashing through her gaze, something even she didn't seem to notice. "Maybe I'll remember." My throat tightened, and I could only nod firmly. "All right." Our first stop was a flower shop. The shop wasn't far from our place, right on a street corner. It was small but tastefully decorated, with the freshest bouquets always displayed out front. Ever since we got married, the white irises in our home had always come from here. I pushed open the glass door, and the wind chimes rang out with a crisp, cheerful sound. The owner was a kind middle-aged woman. When she saw me, she immediately smiled in greeting. "Mr. Wang, you're here early today." Then her gaze fell on Willow beside me, and the smile on her face grew warmer. "And the missus came along too. Are you feeling better? We heard you were hospitalized a while ago." Everyone in the neighborhood was so worried. Willow's body stiffened slightly, but she still nodded politely. "I'm much better now. Thank you for your concern." I took her slightly cool hand and said softly, "We'd like a bouquet of white irises." "Of course, same as usual, right?" the owner replied with a smile, deftly selecting, trimming, and wrapping the flowers. Willow's gaze was drawn to the clusters of pure white petals. In the sunlight, the white was almost translucent, carrying a kind of untainted, sacred purity. "Why, irises?" she asked softly, whether she was asking me, or herself. I couldn't tell. My thoughts were instantly pulled back to a gentle, breezy evening 3 years ago. Back then, I had just picked up a part-time job at this flower shop, clumsily learning how to handle flowers, and she had just begun to step away from that bridge filled with sorrow, willing to wander aimlessly with me through the dusk-lit streets. There was still an inescapable melancholy between her brows and eyes, but she was already willing to show me the faintest smile. That day, we happened to pass by this very shop. Looking at the riot of colorful flowers inside, I asked her on a whim, "What's your favorite flower?" She stopped, turned her head to look at me. The glow of the setting sun spilled over her face, tinting her eyelashes gold. Her brows curved gently. It was the first time I had ever seen her smile so brightly. "Irises." "Why?" I pressed. She blinked at me playfully. In that instant, her usual sadness and composure vanished, leaving behind a lively, vivid girl. In Greek mythology, irises are associated with the rainbow. The rainbow. I was completely confused. "It's a riddle," she said with a smile, a hint of smug delight in her voice. "And I've already made it very simple. Try to guess, what's the answer to my riddle?" I looked into her sparkling eyes, filled with tiny fragments of starlight and expectation. In that moment, my heart was racing. I didn't guess it correctly. I was just an ordinary engineering student, my head full of code and formulas. I simply couldn't grasp something so poetic and romantic. Embarrassed, I scratched my head and guessed all sorts of things, rainbow bridges, divine messengers, but she only laughed and shook her head. The next day, I spent my part-time wages on a huge bouquet of white irises. Then I waited for her by the bridge, holding the flowers. When she saw me, and the pure white bouquet in my arms, she froze for a moment, then smiled. That smile was even brighter than the day before, like a sky freshly cleared after rain, clean and luminous. She didn't ask me about the answer to the riddle again. She simply took the flowers and held them carefully, tenderly, as if they were something precious. And at that moment, a line I'd once read somewhere suddenly surfaced in my mind. I'd forgotten the exact wording, but the meaning stayed with me. Before I met you, I never thought about getting married. After I met you, I never thought about marrying anyone else. Chapter 9. George. Willow's voice pulled me back from the surging tide of memories. I came back to myself and saw her looking at me with a curious, probing gaze. The florist had already handed over the wrapped bouquet. I reached out and took it. Because you said you liked them, I replied softly, meeting her eyes. I didn't mention the riddle. I didn't reveal the answer either. I thought, perhaps it would be better if she remembered it on her own. She accepted the bouquet, lowered her head, and gently inhaled the crisp, clean scent clinging to the petals, confusion lingering in her eyes. Unconsciously, she used the thumb of her right hand to lightly rub the wedding ring on her left ring finger. The movement was so natural, as if she had done it thousands of times before. After leaving the flower shop, we walked slowly along the street. The sunlight was just right, the breeze, gentle. She held the irises in her arms as she walked beside me, half an arm's length between us. Not far, but not close either. Did we often take walks like this before? She suddenly asked. I nodded. Almost every day. What did we talk about? She sounded puzzled. We don't seem to have many things in common. I smiled. Yeah, not many things in common. I still clearly remembered how awkward our earliest conversations had been, almost like we were talking just for the sake of filling the silence. I talked to her about the von Neumann architecture and Turing machines, and she listened in a daze. She talked to me about the Basel Accords and quantitative easing, and I felt like I was listening to a foreign language. I would enthusiastically analyze the latest international political situation, and she would calmly point out where my views were overly simplistic. Sometimes she would tell me about metaphors in literature, Camus' Sisyphus, or Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. I didn't really understand most of it, but I liked the sound of her voice, cool and clear, like a mountain stream, able to instantly smooth out all my restlessness. I liked watching her speak even more. She was always so focused, so serious, her words filled with a unique sharpness and insight. In those beautiful eyes shimmered the light of wisdom and critical thought, an attraction I found impossible to resist. I had never met a girl like her, born into privilege, yet without a trace of arrogance, brilliant beyond measure, yet never flaunting her intellect. She was a collection of contradictions, possessing both a clear-eyed understanding of the world and a quiet, unintentional kindness. That contradiction gave her a fatal allure, at least, to the boy I was back then, who had nothing but passion and unrealistic dreams. It was irresistible. At first, I only meant to offer a bit of simple kindness, to look after the heartbroken girl who always lingered by the bridge. But at some point, going to the bridge every evening to wait for her had become a habit I couldn't quit. My solitary walks, once reserved for thinking, were completely replaced by the desire to talk to her. We talked about everything. I said to Willow beside me, your finance, my code, politics and history, literature and philosophy. Even though we didn't really understand each other's fields back then, somehow, we could just keep talking. She listened, surprise flickering across her face. Really? That sounds kind of unbelievable. Yeah. I looked at her, my gaze gentle. I think so too. Meeting you, in itself, was an unbelievable thing. When we reached an intersection, she suddenly stopped. Her gaze drifted toward a cafe on the corner of the street. The cafe was tastefully designed, floor-to-ceiling glass windows, vintage wooden tables and chairs, an air of quiet calm. This place, she murmured, I feel like I've been here before. My heart tightened again. Yes, we came here once. That was after we had already grown quite close. One day during a walk, she brought me here. She said it used to be a place she came to often, that the lattes here were very authentic. She ordered a latte for me, and an Americano for herself. I didn't really like coffee, especially bitter black coffee, but I didn't say anything. I just watched her sip her drink slowly, her posture elegant, like a painting. She didn't talk much that day. She just sat there quietly. I could feel it. That place carried many memories of her and Makoto. Bringing me there was perhaps her way of saying goodbye, without words. I stayed with her and finished that latte that was far too bitter for me. After that, she never brought me back again. And later on, whenever she waited for me by the bridge, there would always be an extra cup of warm milk tea in her hand. Sometimes with pearls, sometimes with taro paste, always flavors I liked. She never explained. I never asked. Between us, there was a kind of unspoken understanding. Only once, Willow withdrew her gaze and looked at me. Yes, only once, I answered. Why? I looked at her, hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell the truth. Because you realized I didn't really like coffee. So after that, whenever we met, what you held in your hand became milk tea instead. She froze. She looked down at the bouquet of irises in her arms, then looked back up at me. The emotions in her eyes were so complex I couldn't read them. After a long while, she finally spoke softly. Then, let's go buy a milk tea now. My heart felt as if it had been gently brushed by a warm hand. Okay. In the end, we didn't cross the street. We turned around and walked toward another road. There was a milk tea shop there, one we often went to later on. She ordered 2 cups of pearl milk tea, just like I remembered. Less sugar, no ice. She handed one to me, her fingertips brushing lightly against the back of my hand. Warm. Holding that cup of milk tea, I felt the warmth travel all the way to my heart. Chapter 10. We kept walking, and without realizing it, we arrived at the bridge. This was where our story began, and also where her pain was born. 3 years ago, after Makoto's betrayal and abandonment, Willow fell into a heartbreak that lasted nearly 2 years. During that time, she came to this bridge every single day, not to end her life. She once told me herself that she had felt that impulse, but the pride and reason deep in her bones always held her back. She simply liked watching the river beneath the bridge, watching those tireless fish swimming upstream against the current. She said that when she watched them, it felt like she was looking at herself, struggling in the mud. The first time I met her was right here. Back then, I was still a poor student. Every day I would take different routes on my walks, thinking about all kinds of wild, impractical questions. That day, I happened to pass by this bridge, and I saw her. She stood by the railing, wearing a white dress, her figure so slender it felt as though the wind could carry her away at any moment. She wasn't crying. There was no dramatic expression on her face. She was just quietly staring at the surface of the river, her eyes so hollow it made my chest ache. I could feel the dense, inescapable sorrow radiating from her. I didn't dare go up to her. I only lingered some distance away, pretending to admire the view, quietly watching her until she finally turned and left. The next day, just to be safe, I walked the same route again. Sure enough, at the same time, I saw her again. The same spot, the same posture. That time, I couldn't hold back. I walked over, stood beside her as if by chance, and spoke in the lightest tone I could manage. "Hi, are the fish here, special in some way?" She was startled by my sudden voice and turned to look at me. There was a trace of wariness in her eyes, but very quickly, she saw through the clumsy goodwill behind my attempt at conversation. She shook her head, her voice a little hoarse. "Nothing special." "Oh," I scratched my head, feeling the awkwardness settle in. I thought maybe there was some kind of spectacle. "I see you here every day." She froze for a moment, then understood. "I'm not going to do anything stupid," she said calmly. "I just like staying here for a while." "I know." I looked into her eyes and said seriously, "But the reason it's called an impulse is because you never know if there'll be that one time you won't be able to control it. Why not take a walk somewhere else?" I suggested. "Staring at the river all the time, your mood will get damp too." She didn't respond. She just looked at me quietly. And just like that, our connection began. After she grew tired of watching the fish beneath the water, she finally became willing to leave this bridge and walk with me. And I, even after I no longer had any reason to take this route, still walked here, day after day, walking toward the bridge. And toward her. Chapter 11. Right here. I stood at the center of the bridge and spoke softly to Willow, who had stopped beside me. "This is where we first met." She held the bouquet of irises and leaned against the railing, her gaze falling on the endlessly surging river below. The wind lifted the strands of hair at her temples, brushing across her pale cheek. The look in her eyes slowly overlapped with the one I had seen 3 years ago. The first time I met her, in it, there was sorrow, there was confusion, and there was also a trace of longing. I turned my eyes toward the river as well, my voice tinged with remembrance and quiet emotion. "Back then, I asked you whether the fish here were anything special, and you answered, 'There's nothing special about them.'" She spoke suddenly, cutting me off. My heart lurched violently. I snapped my head around and stared at her. Time seemed to freeze at that instant. The traffic and bustle around us faded into silent background noise. In my world, there was only her. At last, she slowly turned to look at me. At some point, her eyes had reddened. A thin veil of moisture blurred those beautiful eyes, making her vision hazy. Yet I knew she was trying hard, to see me clearly. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye without warning. It traced the smooth line of her cheek and fell onto the pure white irises. And then, she smiled. A smile streaked with tears, yet radiant like a rainbow after rain. She opened her mouth and, with a voice trembling with sobs yet unmistakably clear and familiar, softly called my name. George. That form of address, one she used only when we were closest, hit my mind like a thunderclap. My body went rigid. The next second, she dropped the flowers in her arms. The white irises scattered across the ground. She threw herself into my embrace with all her strength, as if trying to fuse herself into my bones and blood. I felt her warm tears quickly soak through the fabric over my chest. Her body trembled faintly in my arms. I remember now. Her voice was muffled against my chest, but every word was unmistakably clear. "George, I remember everything. I remember that riddle. I remember you standing on the bridge like an idiot, holding a huge bouquet of white irises and waiting for me. I remember you not liking coffee at all, yet staying with me to finish an entire cup of bitter latte. I remember the focused, admiring look in your eyes when you listened to me talk about those dry financial theories. I remember the burning warmth in your palm the first time you held my hand. I remember how, in front of me, you grew from a shy, awkward boy into a man who could shield me from wind and rain. I remember us struggling together, traveling together, turning that empty apartment into a place called home. I remember everything. I'm sorry, George. I'm so sorry, she sobbed uncontrollably in my arms, and I, after a brief surge of wild joy and shock, was completely overwhelmed by a vast, aching tide of tenderness and pain. I tightened my arms, pulling her slender body closer against me, lowering my head. I rested my chin on the crown of her hair and closed my eyes, holding back the heat rising behind them. It's okay. My voice was hoarse beyond recognition. It's all over now. You're back. That's enough. Yes, my girl had finally come back, carrying with her those 5 full years of memories that belonged to us alone. She had returned to my side. After all the twists and turns, everything had finally come back to what it was meant to be. Just like a rainbow, always waiting on the other side of the rain. Chapter 12. Willow's POV. In the 2 years after breaking up with Makoto, my world was gray. Every day, I went to that bridge spanning the river, not to die, but simply to watch the water. The world beneath the surface fascinated me, but I would never allow myself to give up my life over a failed relationship. Makoto wasn't worth that, until one day, a slightly awkward, youthful voice sounded beside me. Hi, are the fish here? Anything special? I startled and turned around, seeing a tall, slender boy. He wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans, a backpack slung over his shoulders. He looked like a student from a nearby university. His eyes were very clean, carrying a kind of cautious kindness that softened my heart, which had bristled with thorns ever since the breakup. I shook my head. My voice was a little hoarse from not speaking much for a long time. Nothing special. He seemed a bit embarrassed and scratched his head. Oh, I thought there might be something interesting. I see you here every day. I immediately understood his attempt at striking up a conversation. I felt a little amused and a little warmed. I'm not going to do anything stupid, I reassured him. I know. He looked straight into my eyes and said seriously, but the reason it's called an impulse is because you never know if there'll be that one time you can't control it. Why not walk somewhere else? Staring at the river all the time, your mood will get damp too. I didn't argue with him. Instead, I rambled on about a few fables related to fish. To my surprise, he started discussing fish evolution paths and the local species unique to this river. Laughing, I asked if he studied biology. He said he was majoring in computer science. Biology was just a hobby. When it got late, I said a brief goodbye and headed home. On the way back, a thought suddenly crossed my mind. Would he come again tomorrow? The answer was yes. After that day, he really did come every single day. We started talking, though most of the time it was incredibly awkward. He told me about the von Neumann architecture, Turing machines, and low-level hardware structures. I could tell he didn't really want to talk about those things. He simply couldn't think of any other way to keep a conversation going with a stranger he had just met. I listened in a daze, yet somehow, I didn't mind. Maybe compared to the monotonous sound of the river below the bridge, even this kind of forced small talk was far more interesting. Watching him sweat through his clumsy attempts at conversation, I felt a sudden urge to play along. Instead of steering things with normal social cues, I started talking nonsense too. I talked to him about the Basel Accords and quantitative easing, analyzing how macroeconomic policy impacts markets. I enjoyed how, even with a completely baffled expression, he would still try his best to find moments in my words where he could say, "That's impressive," or "I see." Then, when I threw questions back at him, he would sink into even deeper confusion, something I found oddly entertaining. Gradually, when I went to the bridge, the first thing that came to mind was no longer the fish beneath the water, but him, the boy I kept, coincidentally, running into every day. At some point, my heart, which I had thought long since withered, began to show signs of life because of his presence. His name was George, an ordinary name, yet it landed in my stagnant heart like a stone, sending ripples across the surface. I started to find his eyes that tried so hard to look worldly, yet were actually clean and sincere, rather cute, cuter than Makoto's. And what made me secretly pleased was that I could feel it. He was drawn to me too, more than once. He told me he had never met a girl like me before. He said my words carried pressure and insight, that there was something powerful about the way I spoke. Chapter 13. It made me laugh a little. I knew it wasn't a love confession. He wasn't that thick-skinned. There was no way he could deliver sweet talk so openly, without even blinking. And yet, words like that, words that weren't love confessions but somehow surpassed them, were the ones that stirred the heart the most. Finally, one day, I grew tired of watching the fish beneath the bridge. I decided to leave that bridge and walk a different path. That evening, I was still by the bridge, but instead of watching the river, I was waiting for him. He arrived right on time. When he saw me standing by the roadside, he looked a little surprised. I smiled at him and took the first step forward. He froze for a second, then immediately followed, walking beside me. We didn't say anything, yet it felt like everything had already been said. From that day on, without ever spelling it out, we began the routine of walking together every evening. He no longer had any reason to watch over me, to make sure I wouldn't do anything foolish, and I could have walked alone. But neither of us could control ourselves. We kept walking toward that bridge, and toward each other. We wandered through many streets of the city, chatting about everything and nothing, with no destination in mind. Once, I led him to a cafe I had once loved, but hadn't visited in a long time. It was a place filled with memories of Makoto. I ordered him a latte and myself an Americano. I watched him lift the cup, frown slightly at the rich aroma. That was when I realized he didn't like coffee, especially bitter coffee. But he didn't say a word. He simply stayed with me and quietly finished the cup that was far too bitter for him. After that, I never took him there again. Later on, I tried buying milk tea instead. He liked it. I liked it too. Between us, an unspoken understanding began to grow, quietly and naturally. Later still, he took a part-time job at a flower shop on a street corner to earn his living expenses. From then on, he always carried a faint floral scent on him. Mixed with the warmth of sunlight, it smelled wonderful. One day during a walk, he suddenly asked me, "What kind of flowers do you like?" The glow of the setting sun spilled across the river and onto his face, tinting his soft hair a warm shade of gold. I looked at him and suddenly felt like teasing him. I curved my brows and smiled like a cat that had just stolen a treat. "Irises." "Why?" he asked. "Because irises," I deliberately dragged out the words, enjoying the puzzled look on his face, "are associated with rainbows in ancient Greek mythology." "Rainbows?" He looked even more confused. "It's a riddle." I blinked at him mischievously. "But I've already made it very simple. Try to guess, what's the answer to my riddle?" I looked into his bright eyes, filled with curiosity about me, and a trace of something he himself hadn't noticed yet. Infatuation. In that instant, my heart started pounding wildly. What was the answer? The answer was, "You are the rainbow I was unbelievably lucky to meet after this long storm." The answer was, "George, I think I've fallen for you." Of course, I didn't say it out loud. I only looked at him, waiting, hoping that he could read the feelings I'd hidden inside that riddle. He didn't guess it. This engineering student, with his head full of code and formulas, simply couldn't grasp my literary, roundabout kind of romance. He scratched his head awkwardly, guessing things like rainbow bridges, or seeing rainbows after storms, and I just smiled and shook my head, denying every single one. Chapter 14. The next day, I went to the bridge to wait for him, just like always. From far away, I saw him, in his arms. He was holding a huge bouquet of pure white irises. Under the setting sun, he cradled that bouquet like a devout believer holding all of his faith. My steps came to a halt in that instant. My heart was struck hard by an immense, gentle force. He hadn't guessed the answer to the riddle, but he had given me something far more moving than the answer itself. He walked up to me and handed me the flowers, his cheeks faintly flushed. "I still couldn't figure it out," he said, "but I thought, if it's something you like, giving it to you can't be wrong." I took the bouquet. The petals still carried the morning dew, and the crisp, clean fragrance enveloped me instantly. I lowered my head, using the flowers to hide my embarrassingly reddened eyes. Then I lifted my head and gave him a radiant smile. That bouquet of irises was placed in the most eye-catching white porcelain vase in my living room. From that day on, our relationship took a qualitative leap forward. He began to appear in my world more and more often. We ate together, watched movies together, curled up on the sofa together, talking about topics that never seemed to run out. I started teaching him some things about business. He learned quickly. His ability to grasp concepts by analogy even surprised me. I realized that he didn't just have sincerity. He also possessed astonishing talent and intelligence worthy of that sincerity. I grew more and more certain. He was not someone meant to stay in a small pond. He might truly soar, and I was willing to be the wind beneath his wings. We got together. The following year, he graduated from university. With my encouragement, he decided to start his own business. I supported him without reservation, becoming his company's very first angel investor. When my parents found out, they were so furious they nearly cut ties with me. They couldn't understand why I would give up Makoto, with his prominent family background, and choose this poor boy who, in their eyes, had nothing at all. They said I was crazy. Maybe I was, but I knew I had never been more clear-headed. I am tired of the profit-driven calculations behind family-arranged marriages. Tired of my parents' marriage, a hollow partnership held together by appearances, where they merely coexist while tormenting each other. What I wanted was simple, a pure, clean love. And if that didn't exist, then I would rather not love at all, not marry at all. But I was lucky. I met George. He wasn't foolish. With my support and guidance, his new company grew at a pace far beyond my expectations, and my parents' criticisms of him gradually faded away. I also began taking over the Liu family business, and everything moved steadily in a good direction. Then we got married, at the Civil Affairs office, holding those two little red booklets. We laughed like fools. He designed a one-of-a-kind wedding ring for me, engraved with the initials of our names. At the wedding, we made lifetime promises to each other. We bought that high-rise apartment in the city center, not big, but with a great view. Together, We slowly turned it from an empty space into a home we loved. The walls were covered with photos from our travels around the world. On the snowy peaks of Switzerland, he wrapped me tightly in his coat and kissed the tip of my nose, red from the cold. In the lavender fields of Provence, I tucked a small bundle of purple flowers into his collar, and he smiled brighter than the sun. On the stone-paved streets of the capital, I wore a kimono and stood on tiptoe to steal a kiss on his cheek, only to be caught and kissed back until I nearly suffocated. And in our kitchen, I wore his white shirt with a completely mismatched pink apron tied around my waist, flour smudged on my face. Brandishing a spatula at him, he stood to the side, watching my antics with that indulgent, helpless smile. Those moments of happiness were frozen by the camera and etched deep into my soul. I thought we would go on like that forever, happy and unchanged, until that car accident. That day, we were walking home hand in hand, talking about our upcoming vacation plans. The sunlight was perfect, the breeze was gentle. I turned my head to look at his handsome profile, my heart filled with a sense of satisfaction and peace I had never known before. Then, a sharp, piercing screech of tires ripping against the ground tore through the calm. I instinctively turned my head. A black sedan, like a crazed beast, had lost control and was charging straight toward us, toward George. Time, in that instant, seemed to slow to an endless crawl. My mind went completely blank. All reason, all thought, vanished in a heartbeat. There was only one idea left. I couldn't let anything happen to him. I didn't hesitate. Using every bit of strength in my body, I shoved him away with all my force. Bang! A massive impact hit me. I saw the look of terror and despair spread across his face in an instant. I saw the hand he reached out to me. Useless, unable to save me. The world before my eyes rapidly lost all color, sinking into boundless darkness. George, I'm sorry. It seems I won't be able to walk the rest of the road with you.